So as you were just notified, this webinar is being recorded. I will share more on that momentarily. Alrighty, well, we are at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. The Virginia Governor's Conference on Aging webinar series is held every fourth Tuesday from 1 to 2 p.m., and it is generously sponsored by Virginia Housing. You'll see our website linked here. I'll also share it in the chat momentarily. Quick plug for our Governor's Conference. In 2025, we will be in Williamsburg at the Williamsburg Lodge in May, and I will also share a few links and details in the chat regarding sponsorship opportunities and opportunities to get involved with our steering committee. Today, I am pleased to introduce Kathleen Cornett of Charlotte Planning from the City of Charlotte, who will be discussing their new comprehensive plan and how it relates to aging. So I will quickly go over some housekeeping items in terms of logistics with the webinar. So we really do encourage questions, but please submit your questions through the Q&A box versus the chat box. This will just help us keep track of all inquiries. But if you have any logistical questions, feel free to direct message me using the chat feature. And if there's any points throughout the presentation that there's any opportunities for open-ended discussion, feel free to use the chat there as well. During the more formal Q&A portion of the webinar, you may use the raise hand feature to request to be unmuted if you'd prefer to ask your question out loud. But otherwise, and I will also share in the chat the link to our YouTube page where you can find all previously recorded webinars in the series, and this one should be posted by the end of the week. So I will pass it over to Kathy, and thank you everyone for joining. I think we have a great presentation ahead of us.
Thank you all. And while I'm getting everything all squared away here, I'll go ahead and share. My name's Kathy Cornett, as Jillian said, and I have been with the City of Charlotte for, I just had my 25th anniversary, so I've been here very long time, obviously. Let me just do this. There we go. You all seeing the full presentation, Jillian, or no?
I'm still looking at the build out mode, but I think if you click.
Oh, I've got it on the wrong screen. Hold on a minute. See if it. Oh. For some reason, it's showing on my other screen, but not here.
If you go to share screen, are you on when you selected share screen, by chance did you select desktop mode? You should be able to specifically click open the PowerPoint option.
Oh, I think I had it on the wrong screen. Let me try this way. Okay.
Perfect.
Is that good?
Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So Kathy Cornett, I've been with the City of Charlotte for about 25 years, working in long-range planning. And this is a great opportunity for us because we don't oftentimes get to talk about the work that we do from the perspective of the aging population. So I'm going to focus on our comprehensive plan and how I think components of that relate to aging in place in our community. And I would also mention that our plan, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, won the APA National Planning Award in 2023. So that's something that we are very excited about. Let me give a little bit of context. Okay. Difficulties here. Of where Charlotte is. So Charlotte is, as you can see, very close to the South Carolina border, about 20 miles away. You can see our relationship to Virginia. There we have I-77 and I-85 kind of connect right in the middle of Charlotte. We've got actually for a city a very large land area. We're about 350 square miles, which is pretty big. About 900,000 residents, and in the region, it's about 2.3 million. And like many southeastern communities, we continue to experience quite a bit of growth, and hence what I'm going to be talking about today. And because
so sorry to cut you off, Kathy. I think you're speaking in reference to the second slide, and so I just want to make sure that we're still on the first slide.
Okay. Let me sorry, let me try to fix it. I'm having a problem because I've got my two screens and I thought that was going to be great, but it's like not doing it. No
worries. And also I have your slide deck, so if it's easier I can throw them up as well.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let me try one more time, and then if not, let's do that.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience as we just sort through a few technical adjustments.
Yeah, Jillian, if you don't mind, I hate to ask you, but let me do it.
Perfectly okay.
One more thing here. So I was on screen one, now I'm on screen two. Are you seeing the second one now?
It's in the build out mode, so
yeah, if you don't mind going ahead
that's
and
okay.
sharing, that would be helpful.
Are you able to see?
Yeah, so now I see the second slide.
Okay, and you can just tell me when to advance and we'll go from there.
Okay, yeah, great. So as I mentioned, just giving you some context of where Charlotte is and kind of our size and where we sit in the Southeast region. And if you want to go to the next one. So a lot of the work that we do is complex, and trying to explain why we're doing it. To be honest with you, sometimes for our elected officials, we try to put it in a more relatable mode. And we've used a bunch of different tools that I'll talk about, but one is this video, and we'll go ahead and, if Jillian, if you don't mind playing that, I'll give you a little bit of setup of what we're going to talk about today.
Yep, I am just pulling up my...
Is America's Queen City, a diverse community that continues to experience rapid growth. Yet many communities in Charlotte have not enjoyed the benefits of thoughtful planning. Without a citywide plan for growth, these communities are often passed over for valuable investments in policy support, creating inequities and a lack of balance. The Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan is taking a new, community-driven approach to guiding growth in all of Charlotte's communities by focusing on 10 types of places unique to Charlotte, planning the right mix of place types so all areas of Charlotte have a variety of places to live, work, and play can help us ensure equitable growth over time. Input from diverse communities has helped us prioritize access to quality housing, employment, services, and amenities for all residents. So what happened next? Thanks to feedback from people like you, the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan was adopted by City Council on June 21st, 2021. Then the community shared their vision for improving existing and new places in their neighborhoods through the 2040 policy map process. While the community was mapping place types, the city was also finalizing the Unified Development Ordinance and a new set of zoning districts that correspond to each place type. The Unified Development Ordinance was then adopted on August 22nd, 2022. Using the 2040 policy map as a guide, communities will help decide which of the corresponding zoning districts will apply to individual parcels within a given place. And we'll be following up to ensure that all of Charlotte has a place in deciding what types of investments their area needs. The success of this plan relies on you. Your input and feedback can still help shape the plan's implementation. Advancing equity and breaking down barriers to opportunity is essential for all of our communities to thrive. We are living in historic times, and now is the time to work together for a more inclusive and sustainable future.
Thanks. So that just gives you kind of some background on the work that we've been doing over the past 3 years. But really that work started. Yeah, next slide. It started back in 2012 with a regional effort that our local council of governments conducted called Connect Our Future, which was really a regional growth framework that introduced the place type tool to our region and our community. So that was a 13 county effort, 2012 through 2015. It was not necessarily adopted by each of the communities involved, but it was endorsed. So really with the growth and continued growth and where Charlotte was in terms of growth, kind of like our teenage years, we really realized that a lot of the tools that we had on both the policy side and the implementation side, specifically our zoning ordinance, were really kind of out of date for the type of growth that we were experiencing and kind of where our community was in terms of growth. So we undertook a land use policy audit and then did some place type research and testing and developing what sort of tool would work best. How could we take that regional level tool and really drill it down to the level of Charlotte, but yet keep it consistent from a regional perspective. So we did a lot of work around that. And then all of that work led to the development of the comprehensive plan. So that started in late 2018 and was adopted in 2021. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned in the video, we actually had not had a comprehensive plan in Charlotte since 1975. That didn't mean we weren't doing any planning. It really, the type of planning that we were doing tended to be more small area plans that really could only focus on a small portion of the geography and the idea was that at one point in time we would catch up with all of Charlotte's land area, but the amount of time they took and really the resources that we had, what ended up was 75% of our community, well, 25% of our community had the more advanced guidance and the 75% had more dated guidance back to really the 90s for the most part. So at the same time, we also realized, as I mentioned, that our regulations and ordinances had been amended so many times over time. There's multiple regulations and multiple ordinances that touch the land development process. And the policy side kind of informs, what those regulations are written to. So the regulatory side and the policy side really needed to be matched up better. And from a regulatory perspective, all of these different chapters of various ordinances had been amended so much over time that there was conflicting guidance, et cetera. All of those were put into a unified development ordinance that was adopted in 2022. So we're basically doing two gigantic efforts at the same time to try to get ahead of growth and tools that were more in date to guide growth in our future for the next 20 years. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that Charlotte continues to grow, and in the next 20 years, we expect to add 400,000 new residents, 200,000 additional jobs, and about 150,000 households. At the same time, the planning department is not the only department that touches all of these different programs, projects, plans. And in addition to that, a little bit different from Virginia, because I think in Virginia, cities are not necessarily in counties. In North Carolina, cities are in counties, and actually there's not any distinguishable difference between a city or a town. They're all treated as a municipality in the same way. So we are also Charlotte is in Mecklenburg County, and Mecklenburg County controls, for example, parks and greenways and some of the social services. So there's a lot of coordination interdepartmentally and interagency that goes on in our community as well. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit more about engagement later on in the presentation, but in terms of developing our comprehensive plan, we have had over 500,000 interactions. We've heard from over 7,500 voices, more than 480 key stakeholders, and we've used over 40 methods of engagement. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, as I mentioned, as we move on. Next slide. So the comprehensive plan is really an umbrella document that everything else kind of sits under. And so from a policy perspective, our first big implementation item that I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute too is mapping the place-based policies. And so that was another year-long effort that followed the adoption of the comprehensive plan. And that was adopted in March of 2023, the policy map. At the same time, in developing the comprehensive plan, our Charlotte Department of Transportation realized that they had a whole lot of specifics and updates from a transportation perspective that they wanted to accomplish. And so that led to the development of a strategic mobility plan that's also since been adopted. And then, as I mentioned, the development of our unified development ordinance. But the pieces that I'm focusing on today are really on the policy side, so how we grow. Next slide, please. And on that policy side, the comprehensive plan, which I'll talk about first, sets the vision and goals in our growth strategy, and again, introduced that place type tool. The policy map, which I mentioned was the first implementation item, mapped all of those place-based policies. I'll talk a little bit more about the goals and policies that are in the comprehensive plan, but not all of them are necessarily place-based. And then I'll talk a little bit about the effort that we're undertaking, which is kind of the third tier, which is taking the comprehensive plan goals and applying them at a community level. Next slide. So there's 10 goals within the comprehensive plan that are fairly broad. And I would say, from my perspective, the first 6 really apply to how folks age in place, aging communities, all of that. So those are the ones that I'm going to focus on for the purpose of this presentation. Next slide. So the first one that's kind of almost an overarching goal is the concept of the 10-minute neighborhood. And this isn't necessarily new. You've probably heard 10-minute neighborhood, 15-minute neighborhood, 20-minute neighborhood. There's different kind of time sheds that are used. But basically for Charlotte, it means that all households should have access to essential amenities, goods, and services within a 10-minute walk, bike, or transit strip. So some other way than by your vehicle by 2040. So for some neighborhoods and parts of the community, they're pretty far along in this. In other parts, it's more of an aspirational goal. Next slide, please. And so you can see that there's each goal has a number of different objectives that further describe the aspiration in terms of what we're talking about. So I think from in this specific goal, from an age perspective, I think that access to all of, of course, healthy food, healthcare, community facilities, social facilities, financial facilities and services, all of those are important, and the ability to do it without having to use your car is important as well. So what that means is really a dedication to developing a robust sidewalk, greenway, walking trails, bicycle network, and also the continued development of transit services, and that's both local transit service and rapid transit service. Next slide, please. And then each of the goals also have what we refer to as a big policy idea. So some program or project or idea or concept that is new to our community. So each of them have one or two, maybe three. For goal one, really one big new idea that is pretty aspirational is developing community benefit agreements. Those exist today in terms of a lot of our development happens through the rezoning process, which tends to be a more negotiated process. Part of the effort of the comprehensive plan and the unified development ordinance, which included rewriting our zoning ordinance, is to kind of move away from that negotiated process to a more by right process. But as we do that, one component of the rezoning process oftentimes is some sort of community benefit agreement. So some sort of shared understanding of the developer providing some sort of enhanced sidewalk network or something that is very specific to that portion of the community in order to get support for rezoning the property and then the project that they're trying to do. So we don't want to lose that piece of that. So community benefit agreements is one way to kind of continue that piece of the process while kind of streamlining it, because the rezoning process is very time consuming for not only the developer, but our staff, and then the community as a whole spends a lot of time and resources in that process, and it can be very confusing. Next slide, please. So another goal is goal number 2, neighborhood diversity and inclusion. And really, this is the big idea here was that increasing the presence of what we call missing middle housing. So the idea that neighborhoods are not just single family homes, so that we broaden the definition so that when we say what we call neighborhood 1, which is the lowest density in which you think of as your traditional single family neighborhood, that we don't just mean single family homes, that duplexes and triplexes, and in certain locations quadplexes as well are included in there by right. And that's important not only from a affordability perspective, but just where folks are in life. Not everyone has the need for a single family house or the desire or even can afford it. So if you think of someone that maybe grew up in a certain neighborhood and went away to college and comes back for their first job, and they can't afford or don't need a single family home, but want to remain in their neighborhood. And the same thing for folks that are aging in place. You may not have the need for or desire for a single family home, but you want to stay in your community. Next slide, please. So if we look at the objectives that are under this particular goal. It also includes increasing the number of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, or your granny flats, or whatever term you want to use for that type of housing. And then, as I mentioned, the duplexes and triplexes, quads, and where they can be, where they have prime access to transit or major thoroughfares, and also decreasing some of the parking that is required per unit in neighborhoods. Next slide, please. And so really, our comprehensive plan was adopted in 2021. So it was mainly developed right around the time of COVID, actually. So that was another challenge. But at that time, this was kind of an emerging national conversation. And Minneapolis, when we were probably right around the middle of developing our comprehensive plan, Minneapolis had adopted their comprehensive plan, which had the same idea in it of not just having single family zoning districts and encouraging housing diversity. Since that time, I guess Charlotte was kind of on the forefront of it in adopting this policy in our comprehensive plan. But since that time, it's really become much more of a national conversation, and multiple communities have the same policies now as well. Next slide, please. Our third goal is housing access for all. And I'd mentioned too that most of the goals have some sort of overlap, and you can see a lot of themes that are beginning to emerge. So again, the housing affordability and accessibility, and making sure there are opportunities for residents of all incomes to access affordable housing. And that's in one way by preserving naturally occurring affordable housing, and then increasing the number of affordable and workforce housing units through new construction. So again, this is a national conversation that we're hearing as well. You can't go anywhere without hearing about affordable housing in all segments of the country. So this is a very important policy as well, I think, throughout the country. Next slide, please. And so you can see, again, objectives that relate towards, reducing housing cost burden, increasing opportunities for housing, and in a lot of ways, and some of this is directly tied to our Unified Development Ordinance, which provides more incentives for that affordability component as part of development as well. Next slide, please. And as far as a big policy idea, there are a couple. The first is mandatory inclusionary zoning, which right now in North Carolina, you does not recognize inclusionary zoning. And also, as a more aspirational goal, creating a restorative justice program. And I think right now in North Carolina, the only one that I'm aware of is in Asheville. But that's another big policy idea that came out of this goal. Next slide, please. So throughout this process of developing the comprehensive plan and work that we've done since then, continually one aspect or one desire from the community that rises to the top is promoting not only shared use or paths or trails or grade separated paths or trails, greenway network, not only for recreational use, but also for as a transportation option. So next slide, please. So transit and trail-oriented development, Charlotte is pretty familiar with transit-oriented development. We have a light rail line that a portion of it is about 15 years old now, and has continually exceeded ridership expectations. And much of the development is around the portion of that line that was constructed first. So we're pretty familiar with transit-oriented development, but trail-oriented development is a newer concept. So as I mentioned again, folks are very, very interested in creating a more robust greenway network. And again, parks, trails, greenways are a county function, but on the city side, we do work with the county to kind of marry up at these two goals at the same time. And how can we create more opportunities for folks to maximize density around our trails as well, so that they are more of a transportation network. Next slide, please. So in terms of this policy, prioritizing TOD and also equitable TOD, because much of the transit-oriented development we've seen has been looked at from an economic generating perspective over the years, but that equity component with this plan and with much of the work that we've been doing is layered on top of it. So increasing the tools that we have along high performance transit and trail corridors. Next slide, please. So goal 5, safe and equitable mobility. This builds in the theme that we've heard about of tree shaded ways to get around without using a car, but adds in the street component, because that's at the crux of it. That's what Charlotte Transportation does. And having a more robust network that really feeds into the 10-minute neighborhood concept, and just kind of the regional concept as well, of having opportunities for folks to get the goods and services they need in their community and throughout the region. Next slide, please. So this particular goal in our work with Charlotte Department of Transportation, they realized that really they couldn't, this goal and the work of the comprehensive plan kind of spurred on a whole strategic mobility plan that they undertook as part of the development of the comprehensive plan, and was adopted, I think, in 2023 as well. And it also built upon Charlotte's Vision Zero program, which is safety-based. And there's many similar programs throughout the country. And also, one big idea that came out of this and is contained in the strategic mobility plan is the idea that Charlotte will have a 50-50 mode split, which is pretty ambitious. So that's saying that 50% of trips that take place in Charlotte will be vehicular, and the other 50% will be some other non-vehicular mode. So that is a very big idea and a new idea for Charlotte as well. Next slide, please. And so that's what, in terms of the big policy idea, that's what an aggressive mode shift goal, 50-50 is pretty aggressive. And there's a few other different big ideas in here as well, that all of those are kind of memorialized in the strategic mobility plan. Next slide, please. So healthy, safe, and active communities, again, that folks will live and work in safe and resilient communities that have access that or enable healthy and active lifestyles. And also it addresses some of the harmful environmental contaminants that some portions of our community experience more than others. And actually, if where you live in the community is hotter than anywhere else, it's going to impact your ability to get around some other way than your vehicle use, transit, all of those things. Next slide, please. So again, this one also relates to the Mecklenburg County Health Department in terms of some of the programs that increase access to healthy foods and eliminating food deserts. Many of these issues are not there's not just one solution. It's multiple, it's multifaceted, and there's multiple solutions or programs that are administered by different departments in the city and the county. So this is one we're really working together in terms of both the police and public safety, Charlotte Department of Transportation, Charlotte Transit, also the health department, as I mentioned. The objectives in this goal really touch a variety of different projects and programs in order to achieve their aspirations. Next slide, please. And then again, the big policy idea really is adopting and programming space using multiple organizations throughout the city, and I would add the county to that as well, to kind of to increase opportunities for active and healthy living. Next slide, please. So I had mentioned the policy map as one of the first big implementation pieces of our comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan was adopted in June of 2021, and we pretty much immediately began mapping what I call the place-based policies to kind of share how those should be used in the decision-making process. And so it informs rezoning decisions, which are made by, we as staff provide recommendations, but then elected and appointed officials make those decisions. It also informs future capital investments, mobility investments, and all of this, all of that work went into developing Charlotte's 2040 policy map. So taking all of our land-based policies and updating those in a new map using a new tool. Next slide, please. And that tool is place types, which we touched upon earlier and were mentioned in the video. So they're not zoning districts. They're a method of organizing and classifying patterns of development. When you think about most communities use what they call future land use. And when you think about land use, it doesn't really tell you much in terms of what to expect other than what that use might be. So place types, we like to say, are land use plus. It's not a new tool nationally, but it was new to Charlotte. And as I mentioned, it was first introduced at the regional level back in 2012. But it took a little while for us to figure out how exactly that tool works here, because over the past 20 years, with the advent of more mixed uses and different types of uses and redevelopment that you wouldn't expect to see, where something had once been more of a manufacturing environment and then translates into more, sometimes an entertainment environment or a office environment. We had developed a future land use palette that was something like 80 some different future land use classifications, which was way too complicated and really didn't tell you what you what was expected for future development in that area. And also it was applied at a parcel level, which again is a little bit too granular. So place types include the land use component, but they also include building form and design, what can be inspected from in that regard, and then also mobility, how you would access it, or types of streets that should be fronted on, et cetera. And then what the open space component could be, what could be expected in that realm. So it gives a little more clarity to not only developers who just want to know what are the rules or what are you looking for, elected and appointed officials who are making the decisions, and also community members as to what they can expect future development in their community to be. It's also key in creating the complete communities, where we mentioned that's a whole portion of the 10-minute neighborhood. You need all of those different components in order to achieve the complete community and a 10-minute neighborhood. And then I'd mentioned that we adopted the place type tool as part of the comprehensive plan, but then it was applied at a subsequent in a subsequent effort, which was separate, the policy map. Next slide, please. And we have 10 place types in our palette, so we've kind of really distilled it down, and we categorize them into live, work, and play. Next slide, please. And then you can see what each one, kind of what the expectations are in terms of development and form and mobility and open space expectations. When we talk about activity centers, we're really talking about where the places are where there would be your more intense housing and the availability of goods and services. And they increase in intensity from the neighborhood level all the way up to a regional level. Neighborhood 1 and 2, so neighborhood 1 being the lower density areas that are primarily single family, but introduce the other components such as duplex, triplexes, and quads. And then higher density housing is kind of like neighborhood 1 plus, where you would also find other more intense housing types like townhomes and apartments. And those kind of typically are adjacent to neighborhood serving services or neighborhood activity centers as well. Campuses also, that's another one that it's not just a school campus, but it could be a medical campus, or it could be an employment campus. And then the last thing I'll mention is that there's really primary and secondary uses in each of these. So when we talk about neighborhood 1 or neighborhood 2, we recognize that neighborhoods are not just the residential component. There's churches and small schools and small neighborhood scale parks that are all part of what makes up a neighborhood. So neighborhood 1 includes all of those components. When we talk about parks and preserves, we're really talking more about the more regional size parks and preserves that have ball fields and multiple components, and might have a natural component, etc. 50 or more acres. Next slide, please. And then I had mentioned the Unified Development Ordinance and rewriting of our zoning ordinance. So this gave us the opportunity to directly tie those new zoning districts to our place types. So each of the place types has very specific zoning districts that are designed to implement that place type as well. Next slide, please. So after policy mapping, and this is outlined as part of the implementation in the comprehensive plan, the next step was community area planning, and we're in the middle of that right now. So that's refining the goals and recommendations and the place type map at a more community level. And initially, we had intended to undertake 2 or 3 area plans every couple of years, over 5 to 7 years. But we were directed by our leadership and council to develop all 14 community area plans at one time, which is a pretty big undertaking. But the benefits of that is it's an equitable and efficient process, and it does facilitate conversations and collaboration among neighborhoods to build upon similarities, because challenges and opportunities on one side of the city are very, very similar to those on other sides, but we all tend to kind of like live in our little radius, and this kind of facilitates that conversation and make sure that if there's an issue in one area, we're treating it the same way as we would in another. It also kind of reimagines the barriers that sometimes serve as neighborhood boundaries and really shouldn't. And it also gives us a chance to identify any citywide policy updates that we may need to undertake that may emerge as part of this process. So we all know that plans are living documents, and communities continue to change over time. And there's always going to be challenges such as COVID or new opportunities like micromobility and the popularity of scooters and bike share and all of those things that aren't contemplated when you're writing the plan, but the plan needs to be nimble enough to adapt to those as well. You don't want this to be something just sitting on a shelf. Next slide, please. So in terms of community area planning, we are in phase 3. Phase 1 was really kind of setting the stage and identifying each community's priorities and kind of applying our equitable growth framework that's within the comprehensive plan at kind of more of a community level to identify what the opportunities for that specific geography are and also what some of the challenges are. The next phase focused on revising the policy map. So we remapped the entire 350 square miles of our community at one time, which is, hundreds of thousands of parcels. And of course, there's going to be, and it used a equitable methodology so that we were treating all areas the same. But of course, nothing is ever 100% complete. So we wanted to kind of break it down into the 14 geographies and kind of have conversations with the community about where we thought that there could be some tweaks to the map. We began that work last spring and wrapped it up this past fall. We wrapped it up actually in December of 2023. We had 42 different meetings. We would, for each of the 14 geographies, 2 in-person meetings, and then 1 online meeting. And we thought it would result in about 10 to 15% change to the map. Really, it found out that our mapping methodology was actually pretty good, and we only ended up with like a 6% change to the map. So part 2 of that is identifying the projects and programs that we know are needed to support the community's priorities and achieve the aspirational goals for each part of our community. So we're getting ready to kick that off in the fall. And then from there, it'll be developing a plan of action and then review and adoption. Next slide, please. And the expected outcome of this particular effort is 14 area plans that kind of speak to each of the geographies under the umbrella of the comprehensive plan, kind of what the refinements to the map are and any new or known needed infrastructure and amenities, capital investments, and it'll kind of inform that portion of how we spend money on projects in the city. It'll refine the 2040 policy map. And as I mentioned, it might recommend revisions to the comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. So comprehensive plan, again, like any policy document, they inform decision-making, but they're not regulations or laws. Those are included in our ordinances. It identifies public and private investments that are needed to achieve a vision, but they don't provide the funding. That, again, is in itself a separate process, but we are moving more towards the comprehensive plan and the work that's comes out of the comprehensive plan as being kind of the guiding light for determining how that funding happens. It might recommend zoning changes in certain locations, but it does not rezone property. That in and of itself is a separate process with its own engagement process. And it might guide more appropriate development, but it does not stop development. Next slide, please. And one thing that I'm interested in hearing from this group about as well is in terms of engagement, because a lot of not so great things came out of COVID, but I think that one thing for our staff and that I've heard from other peers throughout the country is that it really kind of upped our game in terms of the way we engage folks in terms of what we call our constant bucket. So all of our engagement aims to be equitable and inclusive, and we've kind of divided it into 3 different buckets. Constant is really, and that was a necessity with COVID, that we've just continued to increase what we offer and how we offer it. So the website videos, like the one we just saw, there's other videos we've developed, quarterly newsletters, using social media, a lot of online tools, online surveys, online comment maps that you can comment on, the availability of different toolkits for folks to tell us more about their community, all the things that are available 24/7. We've really kind of upped our game in terms of what we offer in that component. And then the other component is a more traditional coordinated one, but really adding more focus groups. We, of course, had our traditional workshops. We offered library office hours. So we had staff at local libraries in each of the 14 geographies for the entire day, once a month, and attending neighborhood meetings and then cultural events, specifically in that aspect, to try to reach hard to the portions of our community that we sometimes struggle to hear from. And that would be African-American community, the Latino community, kind of our west and east side geography from a geography perspective, and also the younger population and the older population. So those are areas that we typically have to have different types of outreach, and that we continue to try to find different ways to reach. On the collaborative side, it's not just the community that is a stakeholder, but again, all of the other departments and agencies that we work with. So we have what we call a Joint Use Task Force Implementation Subcommittee. So Joint Use Task Force has been around for a long time, and it includes all of those different departments and neighboring towns, county agencies, et cetera, and it meets on a monthly basis. Having equity, diversion, and inclusion ambassadors, and then also our planning commission and planning committee, and then also city council and council committees as well. Next slide, please. And so from the engagement that we've done around the community area planning process, so far as of this month, we've had about 140,000 different interactions over those three methods or three buckets of engagement. Next slide, please. And we're gearing up for our fall workshops, which again, identify projects and programs that are needed to support the community's vision. It also serves as really kind of an information hub for some departments as well, because there's lots of projects and programs that community members may not realize already exist. So I think one lesson we learned from the last round of engagement that we did, where we offered, we had 42 meetings. It was really oversaturating the market, I guess I'd say, because our in-person attendance has been, we typically would get, it was not unusual to have 80 to 100 people at a workshop or a meeting of that type. But really this time around, we were seeing more like 20 people per meeting. So if you did the math, it was, 500 people total over the 42 different meetings, but it was probably too many opportunities. And the other thing is we continue to see, like with this group here, that the most popular option continues to be the virtual option, and the virtual option at lunchtime specifically is where we tend to have the most folks participating. So developing different ways to create the same environment in two different venues, the virtual venue and then the in-person venue, is something that we continue to do. So we are gearing up for those meetings, and we're offering 8 this time. So cardinal geographies, grouping plan areas together, and then there'll be 4 virtual and 4 in person. Next slide, please. So that is all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. My contact information and also our project contact information. We have a project mailbox. We have multiple social media avenues that we use as well. And then, of course, our website has all the information that I've been talking about today and a whole lot more.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was an excellent presentation, and we have had a few questions come in, so let me pull those up. Well, earlier in your presentation, you had mentioned the 50-50 split goal, and Caitlin Finkel, and again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing any names, asks what is the time frame for this goal?
Over 20 years. So it is a very aspirational goal, but yeah.
And I'll also note, before I head to the next question, folks, Kathy did open up the floor for any suggestions in terms of outreach to this demographic that you work with, older citizens. So if you have any suggestions for the best tools and resources or methods to engage older folks in their region, please feel free to put suggestions in the chat box. And it looks like we had one in the chat come in. Dave Boehm, again, sorry about the name if I'm getting it wrong, remarks, excellent presentation. He is wondering the extent of which access for those with disabilities, for example, wheelchair access to buildings, businesses, services, general mobility, or other barriers, was considered in planning and development of specific goals.
Yeah, that's a great, thank you for bringing that up. So yes, in the goals, that is part of why you see non-vehicular and having to really increase the network that we have today. Some parts of our community have a great sidewalk network, and actually we have somewhat of a relationship with different agencies that address a variety of different disabilities, but it's also written into the regulatory side of the zoning districts. So for example, I remember it coming up with like a walk-up type environment where you want to build like a townhouse type style development that you want to pull as close to the street as you can. And in order to kind of provide a little bit more privacy, you might separate that with stairs or something of that, something similar. And there are some guidelines in the Unified Development Ordinance and the zoning side that address that. And also our building standards are, that falls under the county. So again, it's one of those things where it needs to be touched from multiple sides, multiple agencies, multiple ordinances and policies, et cetera. But it is considered in both the comprehensive plan and the Unified Development Ordinance. I think in terms of building requirements, that's a little bit more of a challenge and not one I'm only familiar enough with it to be dangerous.
Thank you. And a question that I actually had, you had briefly mentioned Vision Zero earlier in the presentation, and I know that a lot of the individuals on right now, are interested in making streets safer for older individuals. So can you just explain a little bit more about what Vision Zero is?
Yeah, Vision Zero is actually, it's actually an international program. I want to say it started in one of the Scandinavian countries, I think, but many cities have Vision Zero plans in the United States as well. And so ours was developed, I think, maybe 5 years ago or so. And again, it was an interagency effort at identifying where pedestrian fatalities were high, all of those types of things from the issue identification standpoint, and then has a number of different recommendations on how to make our streets safer. And it's looking at it again from the non-vehicular perspective. It is, if you look at our strategic mobility plan, and I can share those links with you, Jillian, to send out afterwards if you'd like. Both the Vision Zero plan and the strategic mobility plan on CDOT's website, and I think we do have links to them from the comprehensive plan linked to Vision Zero. So it's kind of the umbrella for which we do planning and making sure that all of our regulatory pieces are considering those safety considerations, and that we're continually monitoring where there are problem areas in the community as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question I had, you had spent some time on ADUs and housing affordability, and I know that a conversation within the aging community is, you know, the potential retrofitting of existing facilities or buildings for more housing. How does that fall within, where might that fall within the plan? And if you have any specific examples within Charlotte, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it does in terms of the neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2, and also I would mention more of our higher intensity housing is going to fall within our activity center. So really your activity center is kind of like your ultimate, where you're going to be able to get all your needs met in one place. So there are, and I also mentioned the innovation mixed use, which we have, especially in what we call the south end portion of where our light rail service is. We've seen a lot of redevelopment of what were formerly, you know, mills or just places that were more industrial in nature. And there's either not a need for that particular use anymore, or it's moved to some other portion of the community, but leaves a building that still can be repurposed for another use. A lot of times those have been more like entertainment type uses, I'd say. So like pickleball courts, or, you know, indoor pickleball courts, food halls, those types of things. But in addition to that, there have been ones that have been redeveloped for housing. And really, we want to concentrate our more intense housing where it can be served, and where part of that service is along our high frequency transportation networks, mostly along our transit networks. And then you'd want to pair that as well with rail trails and those sort of things. So because every transit trip obviously starts as a pedestrian trip at some point. So those are things that we are actively encouraging in the comprehensive plan. And then because our zoning districts are specifically written to implement the place types that are within the comprehensive plan, the regulatory piece that's needed are written in those regulations.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'll just say, you know, I think it's been excellent to have a local government perspective in this webinar series, and to have an out-of-state perspective as well. So I found this super informative, and I think a lot of our attendees did as well. So I just want to thank you so much for your time. I don't know if you have any last remarks to make, but I will just say to our attendees, thank you for joining. And a follow-up email with all the links to the presentation slide deck, to Kathy's contact information, and the link to the recording will be shared in the coming days. So keep your eyes peeled on your inboxes for that. But thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.